Hey everyone, welcome in. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the 2025 cyber insurance market. You guys sent over this 2025 Cyber Insurance Market Outlook report. And honestly, it's a little bit scary. Have you ever thought about what would happen if, like, your business was suddenly hit with a ransomware attack? Like tomorrow, could you handle the downtime, the recovery costs, the hit to your reputation?
Yeah, it's a question more and more business leaders are grappling with these days, and it's no surprise given that the cyber threat landscape is changing faster than ever.
For sure. So, okay, let's unpack this a little. The report really seems to point to ransomware as the number one threat that businesses face today. But, I mean, it's more than just a buzzword, right? Like, what does this actually look like for someone running a business?
Well, imagine this, your entire computer system suddenly locks up. You can't access any of your files. They're all encrypted. And then you get a message demanding a pretty hefty ransom to unlock them. That's the reality for thousands of businesses each year. 2024 was actually likely a record-breaking year for ransomware payouts. Billions of dollars changing hands.
Billions with a B. Wow. I guess that explains why everyone's so worried about this. The report actually mentioned this group called Dark Angels, who reportedly made something like $75 million from just one attack. I mean, are these guys just targeting like huge corporations?
Not anymore. What's really concerning is the shift we're seeing in who they target.
Mm.
Healthcare providers, schools, even government agencies are becoming increasingly vulnerable. They often lack the resources for really robust cybersecurity,
Mm.
and they're much more likely to just pay the ransom because they can't afford any disruption to their services.
So it's not even just about the money. It's about the potential for chaos and disruption. I mean, that's terrifying, especially when you think about like hospitals or emergency services being taken offline.
Exactly. And it's not just ransomware that's keeping CEOs up at night these days.
Mm.
Uh, let's talk about another vulnerability that's often overlooked. Your supply chain.
Supply chains. Okay, help me understand this. I get that like a weak link in my own company's security can be exploited, but how does that relate to my suppliers?
Well, think of it this way. You might have Fort Knox level security at your own company. But what about the small software vendor you use for accounting, or the cloud storage provider that holds all your customer data? If they have weak security practices, hackers can use them as a backdoor to get to you.
So it's like a domino effect. One weak link can bring down the entire chain. The report mentions something like 45% of businesses could potentially face these kinds of attacks by 2025. I mean, that's a scary thought.
It is. And what's even more alarming is that the tools that these hackers are using are getting incredibly sophisticated, thanks in part to artificial intelligence.
AI. You mean like the stuff that powers self-driving cars and those chatbots everyone's talking about? Wait, are you saying that hackers are using AI to attack businesses now? That's a whole new level of scary.
It is. Remember when AI was all about self-driving cars and helpful chatbots? Well, cybercriminals are now using it to really accelerate the entire attack cycle, allowing them to probe vulnerabilities, craft custom malware, and even evade detection at speeds we've never seen before.
So instead of like a lone hacker in a dark basement, it's more like a supercomputer just scanning for weaknesses 24/7. I mean, is there anything we can even do to defend against that?
There are. There are ways to fight back, but it requires a completely different approach to security than what most companies are doing now. And one of the scariest applications of AI in cybercrime is the rise of deepfakes.
Okay, deepfakes. I've heard that term before, but honestly, I'm not entirely sure what it means.
Deepfakes are basically synthetic media, usually videos or audio recordings, that are created using artificial intelligence to make someone appear to say or do something they never actually did.
So you're saying someone could create a fake video of me, like endorsing a product I've never even heard of, and it would look totally real?
Exactly. And it's not just limited to endorsing products. Imagine a deepfake video circulating online that shows you, um, making offensive or damaging statements. The damage to your reputation could be irreparable.
Wow, that's a whole other level of worry. So between ransomware, supply chain vulnerabilities, and now these AI-powered attacks, it sounds like businesses are facing an uphill battle. Is there any good news in this report?
Well, the good news is that awareness is growing. Businesses are starting to understand the magnitude of the cyber threat and the importance of taking proactive steps to protect themselves.
Okay, that's encouraging, but where do they even start?
Well, that's a great segue into the next section of the report, which focuses on mitigation strategies. It
Yeah.
talks about the importance of things like employee training, incident response plans, and of course, due diligence when choosing vendors.
Ah, so it's about being prepared and knowing what to do if or when an attack happens. That makes sense. But I'm also curious about like the legal side of things. The report mentioned data privacy laws like GDPR and HIPAA. How do those fit into all of this?
Yeah, data privacy is becoming a major battleground. GDPR, that's the European Union's tough data privacy law, can hit companies with massive fines for mishandling user data. And here in the US, IPPA sets really strict rules for protecting patient health information. Failing to comply with these laws can lead to hefty fines and lawsuits, not to mention, reputational damage.
Right. So businesses aren't just worried about hackers, they're worried about regulators breathing down their necks too.
Exactly. And it's not just about complying with regulations. Consumers are becoming increasingly aware of how their data is being used, and they're demanding more transparency and control.
So it's like a balancing act. Businesses need data to operate and personalize their services, but they also need to be incredibly careful about how they collect and protect that data. Otherwise, they risk, alienating their customers and facing legal consequences.
That's the tightrope they're walking.
Yeah.
And the stakes are getting higher every day.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Ransomware, AI-powered attacks, supply chain vulnerabilities, data privacy laws. It's a lot to digest. Let's take a quick pause to let all of that sink in. When we come back, we'll delve deeper into some of the key takeaways from the report and what they mean for businesses like yours.
All right, so we're back and ready to really dig into what businesses can actually do to protect themselves in this wild west of cyber threats. The report lays out a few strategies, but I'm curious, are we talking about like hiring an army of cybersecurity experts or investing in some top secret AI-powered defense system? Like, what's the game plan here? Well, it doesn't necessarily require a top secret bunker or, a team of hackers turned good guys. The foundation is surprisingly much simpler. It's all about awareness and education.
Okay, you mean like those cheesy cybersecurity training videos they make us watch at work? Like, don't click on suspicious links and all that. Is that really going to stop a sophisticated AI-powered attack?
Well, while those videos might seem a bit simplistic, the core message is absolutely crucial. Cybersecurity is no longer just the IT department's problem. Every single employee, from the CEO to the intern, needs to be aware of the risks and how to avoid, falling victim to these scams.
Okay, so it's about creating a culture of cybersecurity awareness. But beyond training videos, what else can businesses do to really get everyone on board?
We'll think interactive simulations, real-world examples, even gamified training programs. The key is to make it engaging and relevant to people's everyday work. Imagine a training program that simulates a phishing attack, showing employees how easily they could fall for a well-crafted email. That kind of hands-on experience can be much more impactful than just, a lecture.
Yeah, I get it. It's like learning to ride a bike. You can read all the manuals in the world, but nothing beats actually getting on the bike and figuring it out. So employee training is a big one for sure. What else does the report suggest?
Another critical piece is having a solid cyber incident response plan in place. It's basically a roadmap for what to do if your organization does get hit with a cyber attack.
So it's like a fire drill. But for ransomware, you don't want to wait till the system is locked down to figure out who's calling the shots, right?
That's a great analogy. You need to map out the steps you'll take, who's responsible for what, and how you'll communicate with stakeholders.
hmm
Think about things like containing the breach, recovering data, notifying affected parties.
This all sounds super important, but honestly, it's a bit overwhelming. I can imagine a lot of smaller businesses just thinking, this is way too much. I'll just cross my fingers and hope it doesn't happen to me.
I understand that feeling, but the reality is the cost of being unprepared is far greater than the cost of putting these measures in place. Imagine having to pay a hefty ransom, losing weeks of productivity, and then facing potential lawsuits and regulatory fines on top of that. It could be devastating, especially for a small business.
Okay, you've convinced me. Planning is crucial. But let's get back to the supply chain issue we talked about earlier. The report stressed due diligence when choosing vendors. But what does that actually look like in practice? Are we talking background checks for software companies now?
Not quite background checks, but it's a similar concept. Before you sign a contract with a new vendor, you need to really dig into their security practices. Ask about their data protection policies, their incident response plans, their employee training programs. Don't be afraid to get into the nitty-gritty details.
So basically, don't just take their word for it. Demand proof that they're taking cybersecurity seriously. But what if they push back? What if they say it's like too confidential or proprietary to share those details?
That's a red flag. If a vendor is reluctant to be transparent about their security practices, it's a sign that they might not be taking it as seriously as they should. You wouldn't trust a contractor to build your house without seeing their blueprints and safety certifications, would you? Cybersecurity is no different.
Okay, that's a great analogy. You got to be able to trust the people you're working with. And the report also emphasized the importance of seeking expert advice, right? I guess this is where like insurance professionals and lawyers come in.
Absolutely. They can help you assess your organization's specific risks and vulnerabilities, tailor your insurance coverage to your needs, and make sure you're complying with all the relevant laws and regulations. Think of them as your cybersecurity Sherpas, guiding you through the treacherous mountain passes of the digital world.
I like that. So we've got training, planning, due diligence, and expert advice. It's a lot to take in, but it sounds like a solid framework for building a cyber resilient business.
It is. And remember, it's not a one-time thing. The cyber threat landscape is constantly changing. So you need to be constantly adapting and evolving your defenses.
You say every business will be targeted eventually, but isn't that a bit fatalistic? Can't we make it so difficult and costly for these hackers that they just, you know, move on to easier targets?
That's the goal.
Yeah.
And it's certainly possible to make yourself a much less attractive target. The more layers of security you have in place, the more difficult and time-consuming it becomes for hackers to breach your systems, and that's a major deterrent.
Okay, so it's about making yourself a tough nut to crack. I like that. But what about the cost of all this? Cybersecurity can be expensive, and I imagine insurance premiums are going up too, right? Won't this like price out smaller businesses?
That's a valid concern. As cyber attacks become more frequent and costly, insurance companies are getting much more cautious about who they insure and at what price. We're likely to see premiums continue to rise. And some businesses, especially those with poor security practices, might find it difficult or even impossible to get coverage at all.
So it's a double-edged sword. You need cybersecurity to get insurance, but you might not be able to afford cybersecurity if you're a small business. What happens then? Does cyber insurance just become a luxury that only like large corporations can afford?
That's a question a lot of people are asking.
Yeah.
And it's one of the biggest challenges facing the industry. We need to find ways to make cybersecurity more accessible and affordable for businesses of all sizes. Otherwise, we risk creating a digital divide where only the big players can afford to protect themselves.
That's a sobering thought. It sounds like we're at a crossroads. We
Mm.
need to figure out how to make cybersecurity a priority for everyone, not just, a select few.
Exactly. This is a conversation that needs to happen at all levels. From individual businesses to government policymakers, we need to work together to create a safer and more resilient digital ecosystem for everyone.
Well said. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in this section, from employee training and incident response plans to the rising cost of cyber insurance and the potential for a digital divide. I think it's time to shift gears a little bit and talk about the bigger picture. What does all of this mean for the future of cybersecurity?
That's a great question, and one that the report tackles head-on in its concluding section. It paints a picture of a future where cyber threats are even more sophisticated, more pervasive, and more difficult to defend against.
Yeah.
We're talking about a world where AI is not just a tool for hackers, but a potential weapon in the hands of nation states.
Okay, now that sounds truly terrifying. AI-powered warfare in the digital realm. Are we talking about like cyber armies battling it out in the Matrix? What can we even do to prepare for that?
It's a daunting prospect, but it's one we need to start thinking about now. We need to develop new strategies, new technologies, new international collaborations to counter these emerging threats. The future of cybersecurity is it's uncertain, but one thing is clear. It's going to be a wild ride.
A wild ride indeed. I think we need another pause to let that sink in. When we come back, we'll try to make sense of it all and leave you with some key takeaways and actionable advice. Okay, so we've talked about the threats, we've talked about the strategies, we've even like glimpsed into this potential cyber battlefield of the future. It's a lot to process, honestly. So let's try to distill all of this down into something, actionable. Like if I'm listening to this, what are the key takeaways that I should be thinking about for my own business?
Well, I think first and foremost, I hope you've come away from this conversation with a real sense of urgency. Cybersecurity just isn't something you can ignore and hope for the best anymore. It needs to be a top priority for every business, regardless of size or industry.
Right, like you've been saying, it's not a matter of if you'll be targeted, it's a matter of when. So, assuming I'm now sufficiently terrified, what are the first steps that I should take? You've talked about employee training, but is that Is that really enough to stop a, determined hacker?
Employee training is definitely a critical first line of defense. Think of it this way. A well-trained workforce, they can spot phishing emails, they can avoid suspicious links, and generally act as sort of human firewalls. But it's not just about preventing attacks, it's also about responding effectively when they do happen. And that's where a solid incident response plan comes in.
Okay, so training and planning. Check. What about the supply chain issue? How can I be sure that my vendors aren't going to be the weak link that lets the hackers in?
Due diligence is really key here. Don't be afraid to ask, tough questions about your vendor's security practices. Demand proof that they're taking it seriously. Remember, their security is your security at the end of the day.
And of course, I shouldn't forget about data privacy, right? I mean, those GDPR fines sound pretty hefty.
Data privacy is just non-negotiable at this point. You need to understand the regulations that apply to your business and make sure you're complying with them. But it's not just about avoiding fines. It's also about building trust with your customers. Be transparent about how you're using their data. Give them control over their privacy.
So it's about training, planning, due diligence, and respecting data privacy. I mean, it sounds like a lot of work, honestly.
It is, but it's an investment worth making. The potential cost of a cyber attack far outweighs the cost of putting these measures in place. And remember, you don't have to go it alone. There are experts out there, like insurance professionals and cybersecurity consultants,
Yeah.
who can help you, navigate this complex landscape.
Okay, that's reassuring. But what about the bigger picture? I mean, the report painted a pretty bleak picture of the future with AI-powered attacks and, cyber warfare becoming the norm. Does that mean we're all just doomed?
Well, I wouldn't say doomed, but the challenges are certainly growing, that's for sure. As technology advances, so too do the threats. But we're not powerless. We can adapt, we can innovate, we can collaborate to stay ahead of the curve.
So it's not just about building walls. It's about constantly evolving our defenses to meet these new threats. That sounds like a never-ending battle.
It is, and it's a
Hmm.
battle we all need to be engaged in, from individual users to global policymakers. We need to work together to create a more secure and resilient digital ecosystem.
Well said. And that brings us to our final thought for today. The report focused on what businesses can do, but what about individuals? What steps can you take to protect yourself in this increasingly dangerous digital world?
That's a great point. Everyone has a role to play in cybersecurity. Think about your online habits, your passwords, the information you share on social media. Are you doing everything you can to stay safe?
Right. We all need to be mindful of our digital footprint and take steps to protect our privacy and security. So before we sign off, any last words of wisdom for our listeners? What's the one thing you want them to take away from this deep dive?
Cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. Don't wait until it's too late. Be proactive, be vigilant, and be informed. The future of our digital world depends on it.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next time to explore another fascinating topic. Until then, stay curious and stay safe.